The sign on the door of Whitfield Mobility said closed on Saturdays. The woman in the matte black van had a key, which the sign had not planned for. The van pulled into the gravel lot a few minutes after 7 on a warm July morning, and the side door slid open with the soft hydraulic sigh of a machine that cost more than the building it was parked beside. A ramp unfolded. A woman came down it in a wheelchair with her coffee balanced in one hand and a folder of paperwork in her lap. And she let herself into the shop the way people let themselves into places they are not worried about being welcome. Inside, the shop smelled like brake cleaner and yesterday's coffee. 2 bays, 1 long workbench, a rack of children's wheelchairs along the wall, each one tagged in careful block letters. She set the fresh coffee on the bench, in the clear spot that was always clear, and rolled past a corkboard on her way to the window. On the corkboard, between a spoke wrench and a flyer for a dance class, hung a child's crayon drawing. 2 people dancing, one of them drawn sitting down, with big yellow circles for wheels, and both of them smiling the enormous crayon smile that children reserve for things they are certain about. Somewhere in the back, a door opened. The woman smiled at the sound of it and did not turn around. "You are late for your own morning, Jonah Whitfield," she said. "Before you keep going, know this. 4 months before that Saturday, this same woman sat in the middle of a hotel ballroom while 500 people pretended she was furniture. Stay to the end, because the man who proved them all wrong had no idea what he was starting. He thought he was just fixing a break." 4 months earlier. In March of 2026, Jonah Whitfield was 39 years old, and he spent his days underneath the machines that people live in. That is not how his business cards put it. The card said Mobility Equipment Sales and Service, 2 bays, factory certified. But that is what the work was. A wheelchair is not a product to the person sitting in it. It is knees and ankles and the distance to the kitchen. When a chair came into his shop pulling to the left, somebody's whole world had been pulling to the left. Jonah treated the machines accordingly, which was rarer in the industry than it should have been. He had the hands for it. For 13 years, he had been a CNC machinist at an aerospace parts supplier, holding tolerances of 0.5 of an inch for customers who would never know his name. He could read a bearing by the sound of it. He could true a wheel the way other men parallel park without ceremony, mildly surprised anyone found it difficult. The Tuesday before the gala was a fair sample of the work. In the morning, an 80-year-old retired librarian named Mrs. Okoro brought in her scooter because it shuddered above half speed and sat in the waiting chair narrating her week while Jonah found the loose motor mount in about 90 seconds. He tightened it, checked the battery terminals, charged her nothing, and accepted payment in banana bread, which was their standing arrangement, and Sal maintained the worst business model in the county. In the afternoon, a 16-year-old came in for the final fitting on a used ultralight chair Jonah had rebuilt for him. Rigid frame, 4 degrees of camber, and did 3 laps of the parking lot with the expression kids get when a machine finally fits. His mother tried twice to pay more than the invoice. Jonah pointed at the invoice. "You are allowed to run a business like a business," Sal told him that evening, through the fence between their shops. "I do," Jonah said, "just not like a good one." At 3:15, on weekdays he washed his hands with the orange soap, drove the old pickup to the elementary school, and collected his daughter. Wren was 8. She had her mother's opinions and her father's patience, and she used both without mercy. "Dad," she said one afternoon, from the passenger seat. "Your suit smells like the closet." "That is where it lives," Jonah said. "Are you wearing it to the fancy party?" "It is not a fancy party. It is a fundraiser." Wren considered that. "It sounds like a fancy party." The invitation had arrived on heavy paper with the Children's Hospital Foundation's crest at the top. For 2 years, Jonah had been quietly rebuilding donated pediatric wheelchairs, one every few weeks, and sending them to the hospital's therapy department for kids whose insurance had run out of patients. He never made anything of it. Somebody at the foundation finally had, and now he was invited to the annual gala as a community partner, which Sal Petrakis from the machine shop next door read over his shoulder and translated for him. "Community partner," Sal said. "That means free dinner, no microphone." "Suits me," Jonah said, and pinned the invitation under a magnet next to a drawing Wren had made of a truck. To understand what happened in that ballroom, you have to understand the kitchen. Jonah met Maren in 2011 when he was 24, and she was teaching music to elementary school kids who mostly wanted to hit the drum. She had a laugh that arrived early and stayed late. They married in 2014. Wren came in 2018, born 2 weeks late, which Maren said was the last time that child would ever be late for anything. He had spent his working life holding 0.005 of an inch. Loving her was the one measurement he never had to check. In 2021, Maren started dropping things. Then her right foot began to drag on stairs. The tumor was wrapped around her spinal cord like a root around a pipe, and the surgery that saved her life could not save her legs. She came home from the rehabilitation hospital in a wheelchair, 33 years old, with a 3-year-old daughter and a husband who did not know where to put his hands. Maren solved that the way she solved most things. One evening, while the radio played an old standard about the moon, she grabbed his collar as he leaned down to check her brakes and said, "Leave the brakes. Dance with me." "You will have to teach me," he said. "You lead with your feet. I lead with the wheels. Try to keep up." So he learned. Slow circles on the kitchen linoleum, her hand in his, the chair turning under her like it had been built for exactly this. He learned that a wheelchair waltz is mostly trust in geometry, that the turns want to be wide, and that if he watched the wheels, he would drift, so he watched her instead, which had never once been difficult. Maren made rules. The song about the moon was theirs, and it was only for dancing, never for background. If either of them was too tired, they danced anyway, but shorter. Wren was allowed to cut in. Some nights Wren stood on his shoes. Some nights the dinner went cold on the stove, and neither of them apologized to it. It was the best year of his life, and it was her last one. That is a sentence he learned to say plainly, because saying it any other way did not change it. Maren died in the spring of 2022. Wren was 4. Afterward, Jonah found he could not go back to holding tolerances for strangers. He kept thinking about her chair, how the seat had never fit right after the first year, how the left armrest had rattled for a month because the dealer could not schedule a repair, and how he had finally fixed it himself at the kitchen table in 11 minutes with a hex key and a lock washer. 11 minutes. A month of rattling for 11 minutes of work that nobody in that industry had cared enough to do. He took the certification courses at night while Sal's wife watched Wren. Assistive technology, wheelchair seating, and positioning. He worked 18 months at a big medical equipment dealer, learned the billing side, hated it, and in March of 2024, He signed the lease on the 2 bays and hung the sign. The savings went in. The aerospace pension stayed untouched because that was Wren's college money, and some tolerances you do not shave. The record with the Moon song on it stayed on the shelf. 4 years, unplayed. Wren asked him once what Mom had liked. He said, dancing. She wrote it down in a notebook she kept about things because she was that kind of child. The week of the gala, 2 people made the same decision for different reasons, and the ballroom never saw either of them coming. The first was Jonah. He almost declined. Saturday was shop day, and rented rooms full of wealthy strangers were not his natural habitat. But the foundation was deciding that spring whether to fund a proper adaptive seating clinic at the Children's Hospital, a real one, with trained staff and pressure mapping and a repair budget, instead of the closet of mismatched loaner chairs the therapists currently apologized for. If there was any chance a nobody in a closet-smelling suit could put a word in for that clinic, he figured he owed the Saturday chairs that much. Wren straightened his collar at the door with the gravity of a tiny inspector general. If you get scared, she said, find the snack table. That is what I do. Solid tactics, Jonah said. You look really handsome. Mom would say so too. Get in the truck, kiddo. Your ride to Sal's is leaving. The second decision was made 40 minutes across town, on the top floor of Meridian Medical, by the chief executive officer who was tired in a way that org charts do not have a box for. Isabel Marsh was 41. She had been an engineer first, a good one, and then a highway accident in 2017 had rearranged her spine and her life in the same quarter-second. She stayed at Meridian through rehabilitation, kept climbing, and in January of 2025, the board had made her chief executive of a company whose seating division built, among other things, wheelchairs. The trade press loved the story. Isabel had learned to hate what the story did to rooms. People either performed compassion at her or pitched at her. Nobody simply talked to her. Her chief of staff, Noor Haddad, looked up from the gala briefing with the expression of a woman who already knew she had lost. They are expecting a video message, Noor said. Then they will be pleasantly surprised, Isabel said, or the other thing. You are the headline sponsor. They will want the stage, the photographs, the full circus. Which is why the sponsorship office thinks I am sending a video. Isabel closed the briefing. No entourage, no announcement. I want to see how that foundation treats people when it thinks nobody important is watching. We are about to give them a great deal of money, Noor. I would like to know who they are first. Noor gathered her tablet. For the record, the last time you did this, you made a hotel manager cry. He cried, Isabel said, because the accessible entrance was through the loading dock, past the garbage compactor. He should have cried. That Saturday evening, an old pickup truck and a matte black van crossed the same city toward the same hotel, and neither driver had any idea the other existed. The ballroom was the color of money attempting warmth. Gold uplighting, 500 guests, a silent auction along one wall where people bid on vacations they could already afford. Felicity Dunmore had chaired the gala for 11 years and ran it like a woman defending a border. She stood at check-in with a clipboard and a headset, sorting arrivals into their correct orbits at a glance. Jonah reached the front of the line, gave his name, and watched her eyes do the math on his suit. Vendors check in through catering, she said. I am a guest. Whitfield. Community partner. She found him on the third page of the list, in the way that people find parking tickets. "Table 19, she said, already looking past him, and as he turned, she held her empty glass toward him out of pure reflex. "Kitchen is through there." He looked at the glass for a moment, then he took it, because someone was going to have to, and set it gently on the tray of a passing waiter who gave him the smallest nod of brotherhood in the room. Table 19 stood behind a structural pillar at the vendor's edge of the ballroom, where the speeches would arrive as rumor. The place card said "Community Partners" in a font smaller than the wine list. His table mates were a retired school nurse who had volunteered at the hospital for 30 years, a young man who ran a free bike and chair repair night in a church parking lot, and a food bank director who kept doing the math on the centerpieces out loud. The best people in the room, as far as Jonah could tell, all seated behind the same pillar, which told you something about the room's filing system. He walked the silent auction once, out of politeness. Between the vineyard weekends, there was a luxury wellness retreat, 7 pages of amenities, and he read far enough to establish that a wheelchair user could enjoy the lobby of it. He wrote nothing on the bid sheet and went back to his table. Jonah sat, ate the salad, and did what quiet men do at loud parties. He watched. That is how he became, as far as he could ever tell, the only person in that ballroom to actually see the woman in the wheelchair. She had arrived alone, in a black dress with no jewelry to speak of, and taken a position at the rim of the room with a glass of wine she was not drinking. The room flowed around her like she was a planter. A silver-haired donor draped his coat over her armrest without breaking his conversation, then looked briefly astonished when the planter handed it back. 2 women redid a photograph because, as one put it at conversational volume, the chair was in it. A man Jonah would later know as Trent Kavanaugh, a sales vice president wearing the lanyard of the medical company sponsoring the evening, stood a foot from her chair for 10 full minutes, pitching a colleague on his division's compliance rates for end users, without once looking down at the end user beside him. And then Felicity Dunmore's voice carried across the parquet, bright and terrible, aimed at a photographer but landing on the whole room. "Someone move her before the photographs. She is blocking the shot." Waiters swerved. Eyes slid away in that practiced way eyes have. The woman in the wheelchair set her wine on a table, folded her hands in her lap, and wore the expression of someone doing long division to stay calm. Nobody moved her, because nobody would touch the chair, because touching it might mean seeing it. Jonah had seen that whole choreography before. He had watched it happen to Marin in her last year, in restaurants, at school concerts, at a wedding where a hostess asked him if his wife would be more comfortable near the coat room. The specific loneliness of being looked around. From behind his pillar, he felt the old anger arrive, quiet and useful. Then he noticed something else, because his eyes never really clocked out. Every time the woman moved her chair, she corrected with her right push rim. Little compensating strokes all evening. Her left brake was dragging. Probably a bent brake dog riding the tire, out of adjustment by a few millimeters, the kind of fault a dealer would book 3 weeks out and bill an hour for. 500 people had looked at her all evening. He was the first one who saw that the chair was hurt. Jonah did not make a decision so much as discover he had already stood up. He crossed the open floor at an unhurried walk, the kind of approach he used in the shop so nobody ever felt descended upon, and stopped a respectful distance from her chair where she could see all of him without craning. Then he crouched to her eye level. "Ma'am," he said, "your left brake is dragging on the tire. I fix these for a living. May I?" The woman looked at him for a long moment. Later, Much later, she would tell him what that moment had contained, the whole evening recalculating. The coat, the photograph, the pitch about end users, and now a stranger in an honest suit, kneeling, asking. "You are the first person tonight," she said, "to ask me anything." "It is a nice chair," Jonah said. "Somebody is not maintaining it properly, but it is a nice chair." That surprised a short laugh out of her. "The somebody is a dealership my company probably certifies. Then somebody should lose a certification." He held up the slim multi-tool he carried even in a suit, because a man who has been a machinist for 20 years is never entirely off duty. 2 minutes. You will not have to transfer. You will not even have to put down the wine you are not drinking. "You noticed that too," she said, and handed him the wine glass. And this time it meant something completely different. "Please," he asked before he touched the frame. He told her what he was doing while he did it. Brake dog bent a few millimeters proud, riding the tire on every push. He eased it back, checked the engagement, checked the other side because only amateurs fix one brake, and wiped the rim with the pocket square that had never in its life expected employment. It took 4 minutes because he talked as he worked, and she talked back. Her wit was dry. His answers were plain. Neither of them offered a job title, and both of them noticed neither of them had. Across the room, the band came back from its break and started an old standard about the moon. Jonah stood up too fast. 4 years of not hearing that song arrived all at once, in a rented ballroom, holding a stranger's wine. And maybe that is why he did the thing. Or maybe grief just finally moved over on the bench and made room. He set the glass down and offered the woman his hand. "They are playing my wife's song," he said. "Dance with me?" She looked at his hand. "You should know I have not danced since 2017. "Then you are due," Jonah said. "I had a good teacher. You lead with the wheels. I lead with my feet. Try to keep up." Her hand settled into his, and the empty parquet lay ahead of them like open road. They took the floor, with nobody else on it. He turned her chair in slow, easy circles, the way the kitchen had taught him. One hand in hers and one riding light on the push handle, wheels and feet finding the tempo together. She was rusty for 8 bars, and then she was not. The chair swung wide and came back like a good waltz partner. Something lifted off her face, some weight of management. And underneath it was a woman who used to love this, laughing once up at him, surprised at herself. The ballroom went quiet in rings, the way water does. Some people stared because it was beautiful. Some stared because they had spent the whole evening not looking at her and could not work out how she had become the center of the room. Trent Kavanaugh stared with the particular unease of a man feeling a career draft. And Felicity Dunmore came around the parquet at flank speed, clipboard first, arriving at the edge of the floor with her voice already lowered into the register reserved for removing problems. "Excuse me, this is not that kind of event." Which is when the MC, on schedule, oblivious, and magnificent, tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to introduce the evening's headline sponsor. Her company's gift tonight is the largest in this foundation's history. Please welcome the Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Medical, Isabel Marsh." The spotlight swept the head tables, found nobody, kept moving, and landed on the dance floor, on the wheelchair, on the woman in it, hand in hand with a man in a closet-smelling suit, both of them lit up like the finale of a show nobody knew they had tickets to. The applause started confused, 3 people clapping the way you clap at an airport. Then somebody understood, and then everybody did, and the room came down like weather. 500 people rose to their feet for the woman they had spent 4 hours stepping around. Felicity Dunmore stood frozen at the edge of the parquet, mid-objection, her clipboard sagging, watching the person she had ordered moved before the photographs become the photograph. Isabel Marsh, Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Medical, held up her free hand for quiet with the calm of a woman who ran a 9-figure company and did not let go of Jonah with the other. "For the record," she said quietly, only to him under the applause, "I did not plan this part." "For the record," Jonah said, "I do not know what this part is." "Stay for it anyway," she said. "You are the only person in this room I have met honestly." What followed was one of the great physics demonstrations of Jonah Whitfield's life, and he had once watched a 5-axis mill destroy a titanium blank in under a second. The room reversed polarity. The silver-haired donor who had draped his coat on Isabel's armrest was suddenly at her elbow, remembering an urgent passion for accessible design. The 2 women who had reshot their photograph now wanted one with the chair in it, centered. Business cards emerged from evening wear like doves from a magician's jacket. Isabel received all of it, seated perfectly still. With a courtesy so precise, it should have come with a safety warning, and Jonah stood at her shoulder watching wealthy strangers discover that the furniture had a 9-figure checkbook. She let it run for exactly as long as it educated her. Then she took out her phone and called her chief of staff, who answered that on the first ring, because Noor Haddad always answered on the first ring. "Send the foundation our seating clinic proposal tonight," Isabel said. "Full funding, the version with the repair budget and the staff lines, and find out who rebuilds pediatric chairs for the hospital for free." Her eyes came up to Jonah, briefly. "Never mind. He is standing next to me. I want to meet him again on purpose." Felicity Dunmore arrived while the phone was still warm, performing the journey of a woman crossing her own ballroom to apologize without using any of the words. It was a masterpiece of the genre. She was thrilled. She was honored. The evening had simply gotten ahead of itself, and of course seating assignments were handled by a committee, seating being the operative and unfortunate word which she heard leave her own mouth and could not retrieve. "Mrs. Dunmore," Isabel said pleasantly, "earlier this evening you asked for someone to move me before the photographs." "I am certain there was a misunderstanding." "There was," Isabel agreed. "But the photographs and I have since worked it out." At the podium, the MC was reading the evening's acknowledgments and arrived, cruelly punctual, at the line thanking our valued community partners. The spotlight, trained by an operator who had been enjoying himself immensely since the dance, swung out across the ballroom and found table 19, behind its pillar, empty except for a salad fork and a place card. 500 heads turned to look at where the foundation had decided its partners belonged. Felicity's smile held, in the way that bridges hold in newsreels, right before. Trent Kavanaugh chose that moment to attempt the pitch of his career, gliding in with his lanyard-turned label out, and got 4 words into Meridian's compliance journey before Isabel raised one finger. "Mr. Kavanaugh, I have been listening to you describe people like me as end users since the salad course. You stood beside my chair for 10 minutes tonight without looking down once." She turned her palm toward Jonah. "This is Mr. Whitfield. He does not work for us. Tonight, he was the only vendor in this room who touched an actual wheelchair. and he asked permission first, take notes, and then take the parking shuttle. The rest of the evening reorganized itself around the new facts. Isabel stayed another hour and spent most of it at table 19, behind the pillar, talking to the retired school nurse and the young man with the church parking lot repair night, while the head tables watched the wrong end of the ballroom empty of importance. When the foundation's director finally reached her, flushed and rehearsing, she skipped his apology entirely and asked what the seating clinic needed beyond money. He did not know. She told him who would. Jonah drove home that night in the old pickup with the windows down, the suit smelling faintly of ballroom, feeling the way a tuning fork feels an hour after being struck. At Sal's kitchen table, the babysitting report was delivered with formal solemnity. Wren had eaten 2 helpings, argued about bedtime on constitutional grounds, and fallen asleep in the middle of a sentence about whether sharks have elbows. He stood in her doorway a while, the way he did. Then he went down to the shop below the apartment, alone, and looked at the record on the shelf for a long minute. Not tonight. But he moved it to the front of the stack, and that was something. Monday did inventory on everybody. At Meridian, the board loved the coverage, which is what boards are for. A local reporter's video of the dance had gone wider than the company's last 3 product launches combined. And the caption most shared was not about the company at all. It said, nobody in that room knew who she was, except the guy who knelt down. The board loved the optics, Noor said, closing the laptop. He did not know there were optics, Isabel said. That is the entire point, Noor. She rolled to her office window and sat with the thing she could not unknow. For 9 years, kindness had arrived after the title was announced. Every door held open once somebody clocked who she was, every warm handshake that had checked the org chart first. She had built a career learning to price that in. And now a stranger had knelt down in a ballroom before the spotlight when she was nobody, when being kind to her was worth exactly nothing to anyone, and asked permission to help. The math of him would not resolve, and Isabel Marsh had built her whole life out of things that resolved. It frightened her more than the boardroom ever had. It was wonderful, and she resented it, and she kept catching herself smiling, which she also resented. His shop, she said finally. Whitfield Mobility. What do we know? 2 bays, 1 employee himself, factory certifications from 3 of our competitors, and embarrassingly, not from us. Noor consulted her tablet. Also, our clinic proposal needs a repair partner within county lines. I checked. There is exactly 1 candidate. That is extremely convenient, Noor. I thought so too, Noor said, deadpan, and left the file on the desk. Across town, Jonah's Monday was quieter, though not as quiet as he would have liked. 3 customers mentioned the video before noon. Mrs. Okoro brought banana bread on a day that was not banana bread day and looked at him with frank speculation over the top of her glasses. Sal printed a still frame of the dance, wrote free dinner, no microphone across the bottom, and taped it to the fence where Jonah left it, because taking it down would have cost him a decade of commentary. He trued 2 wheels, replaced a joystick module, and at closing time, alone in the shop, he finally took the record off the shelf and put it on. The old standard about the moon filled the 2 bays, and he stood at the bench with his eyes closed and let it finish all the way for the first time in 4 years. Grief did not leave. It moved over on the bench the way it does and made room. At dinner, Wren studied him over the spaghetti with the frank assessment of the 8-year-old scientist. Was the dancing lady nice? Very, Jonah said. Good. She resumed eating, then paused, fork midair, and delivered the family verdict. You lead with your feet. He did not call her, and it was not a strategy. He simply could not think of a version of the call that was not about who she was. If he called the CEO, he became one more person on the phone with the CEO. Whatever had happened on that dance floor had happened between two people who had not exchanged titles, and he found he wanted to protect that more than he wanted to see her again, which told him exactly how much he wanted to see her again. She solved it, of course, because she was the one with a chief of staff. The next morning, the Foundation's letter arrived announcing the adaptive seating clinic, fully funded by Meridian Medical. Attached to the grant cover letter was a note in strong slanted handwriting. It said, "My break is fine," checking whether the repair guarantee was real, and underneath, a signature he now had to reread twice. Isabel Marsh. The clinic took 4 months to build, and it is fair to say the paperwork required an unusual amount of supervision. Whitfield Mobility signed on as repair partner in April. The hospital cleared out the loaner closet, and in its place rose an actual seating clinic, pressure mapping mats, adjustable demo frames in kids' sizes, a therapist trained in positioning, a real repair budget, and a bench in the corner with proper tooling that Jonah spec'd himself down to the Torx drivers. Isabel came to the first site meeting because the CEO attending sent a message about priorities. She came to the second one because the first had run long. By the fourth one, Nor had stopped inventing reasons and just put the shop on the calendar, Saturdays, recurring. That was the spring the shop got its extra key. It was cut in April officially for deliveries and lived on Isabel's keyring, and neither of them ever commented on it. Sal Petrakis commented on it approximately 3 times a week. She would arrive with coffee mid-morning, roll into the second bay, and read his repair tickets like correspondence. She argued with him about Castor-bearing suppliers and won on the merits, which he found unreasonably attractive. He explained camber to her with a bent fork in 2 washers at the counter, and she explained procurement leverage back with the same fork, and the fork was never fully straight again, and stayed in the drawer anyway, the way things do when they have been promoted from silverware to history. Wren met her on the second Saturday, walked a slow circle around the chair with open interest, and asked if it could pop wheelies. It could. That settled that. By June, the two of them had a standing arrangement at the shop counter involving colored pencils, and one afternoon, Wren produced her masterpiece. 2 people dancing, one of them seated on big yellow wheels, both wearing the enormous crayon smile. She taped it to the corkboard herself, at exactly the height an 8-year-old reaches, which is why it hung slightly crooked, and why nobody on this earth was ever going to straighten it. In May, the clinic got its name. Isabel proposed it at the dedication planning meeting as if it were a line item, the Marin Whitfield Seating Clinic, and then watched the man who could true a wheel, blindfolded, stand very still at a conference table and not be able to speak for a full minute. Wren consulted at dinner as the family's other voting member, approved it on the spot, and wrote it in her notebook about things. The dedication itself happened on a Thursday in June, and it was everything the gala had not been. Folding chairs, juice boxes, a ribbon. Wren was deputized to cut with safety scissors after the oversized ceremonial pair defeated 2 administrators. The therapy department came. Mrs. Okoro came, uninvited and unchallenged, and supervised. The first patient through the finished clinic was a 7-year-old girl who had spent a year in a chair 2 sizes too big, and when she rolled out of the fitting room in one that actually fit her, she did the same 3 laps of the hallway that the 16-year-old had done in the parking lot with the same expression. Jonah had to go check on something in the supply room for a couple of minutes. Isabel gave him the couple of minutes and then sent Wren in after him, which was the correct tool for the job. There was a small brass plaque by the door with Marin's name on it. Jonah read it perhaps once a week, on purpose, the way you press on a bruise that is finally healing to check what kind of ache is left. The ache kept changing. That, he understood, was the news the plaque existed to deliver. Even Felicity Dunmore found her way to something like grace. Pride is a strange machine, but it has one honest gear, and she found it. She funded the clinic's wheelchair-accessible transport van outright and had the good taste to do it quietly. When she brought the check to the hospital, she asked, stiffly, whether Mr. Whitfield might show her the clinic. He did, fully, kindly, without 1 ounce of triumph, which she later told the foundation board was somehow worse. She meant it as the highest compliment she knew how to make. And one evening in June, after the last ticket was closed and the bay doors were down, the radio on the workbench found the old standard about the moon, the way radios sometimes conspire. Isabel set her coffee down. "Ask me properly this time," she said. "No broken break, no spotlight. Ask me like it is just us, because it is." Jonah wiped his hands on the shop rag, came around the bench, and knelt to her eye level, which by now was simply where he lived. "May I have this dance?" Wheels and feet, between the benches, no audience but the rack of Saturday chairs. She was not rusty at all anymore. Neither, as it turned out, was he. Which brings everything back to the warm July morning, the matte black van, and the woman with a key the sign had not planned for. Jonah came out of the back room with his shirt sleeves rolled, entirely unstartled, because some sounds a man learns by heart. Ramp, wheels on concrete, coffee set down in the clear spot. He took the coffee and looked at the paperwork in her lap and had the sense to look wary. "That is a lot of folder for a Saturday." "Quarterly clinic report," Isabel said. "Read the circulation numbers and try not to be smug." He read them. 311 children seen since April. 41 chairs rebuilt at a bench he had spec'd himself, under a name that still stopped his heart a little every time he saw it on the letterhead, which Isabel knew, which was half of why she brought the letterhead. Outside the bay door, chalk hopscotch covered the concrete where Wren had been improving the parking lot. The Saturday chairs stood racked and tagged along the wall, each one somebody's knees and ankles, somebody's distance to the kitchen. The clinic van that Felicity Dunmore paid for was due at 10 for pickups. Trent Kavanaugh, it was reported, had transferred to a division with fewer microphones in it, where by all accounts he was doing much better, having learned to look down. Isabel rolled to the corkboard the way she did most mornings, past the spoke wrench, and stopped at the crooked crayon drawing of the 2 dancers. She had negotiated against people whose names were on airports and never once blinked. The drawing got her every single time. 500 people in that ballroom, she said. And you asked the one question that was not about who I was. I did not ask because of who you were, Jonah said. I asked because they were playing our song. It just was not ours yet. She held out her hand. He was already reaching for the radio. The old standard about the moon rose up over the workbench, over the racked chairs, and the smell of brake cleaner, out the open bay door into the July morning where an 8-year-old's hopscotch grid waited for its architect to come back after lunch. One more slow turn between the benches, wheels and feet, her hand in his, nobody watching, and nobody needing anyone to. Everyone in that ballroom had been looking at the same woman. Only one man asked. He had not been looking for a headline, and she had not been looking for a dance partner. They had only been looking out for someone. It turned out to be each other.